It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogstide Network, the show where we look at the dollars and the cents of the sports media business industrial empire and global dominance and an international game of sports risk. How you doing today, Steve?
I'm doing all right, man. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good.
So
I can't complain.
I'm trying to decide my next concert. You got to help me. So there's two.
Okay.
There's two coming up. One is kind of a slam dunk. Ace Frehley coming to the House of Blues in Houston. Ace Frehley being the former original lead guitarist for Kiss. I wouldn't stoop to see Kiss anymore because they fake it. They don't play live anymore. But Ace Frehley, I think that's bound to be awesome. Wouldn't you think?
I would definitely embrace an opportunity to see Ace Frehley. That is plus he's also kind of a train wreck, so you never know what you're going to get.
Oh, that's what I'm talking about. It's like if you're not a huge Kiss fan, to see Ace Frehley is a train wreck. He threatened Paul Stanley like a month ago.
Yeah, no. So I think that would be. Plus, I think all things being equal, he's probably the coolest member of Kiss of all time. I think if you add everything up, he's the top of my coolness Kiss band member list.
Yeah, and if you really are honest, he's probably the one that wrote most of those riffs and stuff too for those old Kiss songs. Would be my guess.
Yes,
a lot
I
of
would
them are
agree
probably
with
his
that.
songs. So
yes.
That one's kind of a slam, but the other one is Yngwie Malmsteen. Now, do you know who Yngwie Malmsteen is?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so he's like, I'm a guitar nerd, obviously. I've played guitar for a long time. Not at Yngwie's level, otherwise I wouldn't be doing this. But I don't really know his music that well, but to me, just to see a guy like that just get up there and shred for 90 minutes straight, you don't even know what he's playing, but he's just going to go up there and play like Paganini and through Marshall amps for an hour. And I think that it seems like it's a once in a lifetime thing that I ought to not miss.
I am not a big virtuoso guy, so, that much shredding would probably be lost on me. Like, I'd much rather see Ace Frehley just throw down like a tight 25-second solo in the middle of a song than the solo be the experience. But I think if you are a guitar shredder type, and especially a guitar shredder type that leans towards the metal side, I don't see how you not go see Yngwie Malmsteen once.
Yeah, and that's me. Again, I'm not at Yngwie's level, obviously, but that is me. But like you, I kind of agree. The reason why I've never got too much in Yngwie, it's kind of like eating chocolate cake for every meal every day. At some point,
lot.
Yeah, it's fun, but then it kind of loses it. I think the guys who are most effective at that kind of thing save those shredding parts for just the right moment. You don't do it for an hour and a half. You do it for 30 seconds. That's more fun.
Yeah, well, the guys that, so if you take like the Eddie Van Halen, he's an example of somebody who went the other way. But if you can only play guitar but you can't sing or write songs very well, then you kind of become like Yngwie Malmsteen. If you can do two of the three things that I just said, obviously Eddie Van Halen was not a singer, but he knew how to craft a song, and he obviously a high-level player. So I think you can always sort of tell the guys that, kind of do the instrumental or the kind of like, they become known, the Steve Vai, Yngwie Malmsteen type, is because they're only one tool players, to use a sports analogy. They don't have that second tool, which needs to be either songwriter or being able to sing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They're not songwriters. The songs aren't that good or all that interesting, but they can just get up there and just shred. And that's like a once in a lifetime. I may never have the opportunity to just see a guy at that level, way above what I will ever be, just get up there and just tear it up for an hour and a half. So I might be the only one in there who doesn't know any of his songs other than one. But I think I'm going to go just to do it. I'll probably have to go by myself, and that's because nobody's going to want to go see Yngwie Malmsteen with me. But that's okay. I'll do it by myself.
That will be you could do a pretty interesting niche ethnographic study of the audience of that show.
Oh, I don't think I need to do any study to know who the audience is going to be.
Everyone, and of course, to me, the high water mark for this kind of stuff was when Steve Vai played Satan's guitar player, battling Ralph Macchio in Crossroads.
Yeah, let me tell you something. That piece that he played is incredibly difficult. The real not Ralph Macchio faking it, but the music behind that from a guitar player is really really tough to learn. It was really impressive. And Steve ought to have like taken that out of the movie and just done that on his own. But yeah,
I'm
that
sure
is
he
kind
did.
of
I'm sure if you went to see him in concert and around that 15-year radius, you would have.
probably yeah. But Steve Vai's another one. You're right. It's because like name a Steve Vai song, quick. Nobody you can't right. But like Eddie Van Halen was actually one of the best rhythm guitar players ever. I mean, the songs he played and everything are very memorable. Whereas you're right, like the Steve Vais and Yngwie Malmsteens of the world, they can just shred.
Yeah, and then the ones that you know of that aren't like I'd say the Randy Rhoads type, then you just attach yourself to the singer songwriter, and then you just get seen as the side man, right? The Brian May, Randy Rhoads type of
George
way.
Lynch, Warren
Yeah.
DeMartini, yeah. So that's what I was debating in my head. Should I spend the money on this? And I think yes, of course I should. Even if I have to go by myself, I think I'm going to go do that. I don't know how much of a loser I'll be to go to a concert by myself, but that's okay. I can live with the label.
Yeah, I
It
don't think
is
you're worried about that.
no, and it's like pretty much the height of nerdiness to go see Yngwie Malmsteen by yourself.
All right, well, report back on Ingve's latest U.S. swing.
I will. This will come up on the show. It's not for a while, but I'm going to set myself up.
Well, there you go. All right, Steve. So had kind of an interesting week. Everyone knows that we are even though neither of us live in the area, which is kind of funny, but we are a Washington area based show to a degree, right? We're associated with the Hogstye, which is associated with the team that plays the NFL football in Washington, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we don't plan it this way. We don't look for these kind of stories, but it is undeniable that the most interesting, far-reaching, all kinds of implications, global, national, geopolitical, sports media business stories resided in and around the nation's capital, the DMV, as the kids call it today. Wow. Where do we want to start? Maybe we'll bridge from our last show where we actually did talk about a lot of Saudi money influence on sports and kind of jump right into the Qatar of it all, and start with the fact that we have seen the first sovereign wealth fund involvement in U.S. professional sports, and that is because they are getting into business with one Ted Leonsis and Monumental Sports.
Yeah. So we talked about last week the Live Golf PGA Tour war has come to a peace treaty. And as everybody knows, the Saudi investment fund is behind that, which is basically the Saudi royal family oil money, more or less, is what it is. And so, and a part of that we kind of mentioned in passing the NBA's reaction to it, and the NBA commissioner said something like, we've offered this for a couple years and nobody's taken us up on it. This is kind of a throwaway point. Well, if you look at a story in CNBC, Qatar, I say Qatar, everybody says Qatar. I say Qatar just to be different. So I'm going to continue. Qatar Investment Authority offers to buy minority stake in Washington Wizards parent company. It's Annika Kim Constantino and Jessica Golden are responsible for this, published on 22nd of June. So what's happened here is that Qatar's sovereign wealth fund is offered to buy a 5% stake in Monumental Sports and Entertainment, which is Ted Leonsis' vehicle through which he owns the Washington Wizards and a bunch of other things. And now it's only 5%. The NBA has still reviewing the deal and has not approved it. But this is a major, major step. Major step. This is just the first. And if you think back to as an analogy, like 15 years ago, none of these teams are involved in gambling. And now like the NFL is like in bed and embracing gambling. And so here we have the first baby step of a foreign sovereign wealth fund is going to buy just 5%. Now, someday, however many years, don't know, You're going to see a lot more of this, and you're going to see bigger. And will it come to the point where one of these will actually be a majority owner of an NBA or other team? That's what's interesting to me. It's Oh, by the way, the article says this is first reported by Sportico to give the right credit. So this column is quoting Sportico, I guess. But apparently, the NBA rule in this is that the policy is that the foreign fund can buy up to 20% of an NBA team. So that's the limit. I'm saying that as soon as they see all this money, that limit is going to go up. That's what I'm saying. But this is very interesting, particularly in that it's buying the Washington team, kind of the seat of, United States political power. And here we're having some, Middle Eastern oil money buy up the basketball team. Thoughts?
Lots of thoughts. It's not just a basketball team here. So it's buying into the parent company, Monumental Sports or whatever. I think Monumental is the key word. I might getting the rest of the brand.
Monumental Sports and Entertainment.
There you go. So that's the umbrella company, and that's Ted Leonsis. So just, you can just write Ted Leonsis on the umbrella. So that includes the Wizards, it includes the Capitals, it includes the Mystics, it includes whatever esports things Leonsis is into, which is sizable, actually. We can laugh at it, but it's a big investment for them.
Yeah.
And it's the network. Now, by the way, the network now has become stronger because now it is merged or it purchased a while ago or whatever, but now locally, just a couple days before this Qatar news was announced, they announced that everything that was formerly known as NBC Sports Washington, so think of J.P. Finley and his beat club for the team, for the Washington Commanders, is now Monumental Sports. So they already had this. So anything local DC media sports related for the Caps and Wizards and Mystics as of right now is now Monumental Sports. So you also had a massive sort of broadcast consolidation there. And so far, Ted Leonsis seems to be at worst on the short list of potential buyers for the Nationals. So is this, you look at the big picture, you have all those holdings that I just mentioned, and is this strengthening the war chest for a run at the Nationals? Then you move the Nationals into that media empire. We also saw some updates in the battle between Masson and the Orioles and Nationals. Not a full settlement, but excuse me, Steve, I got a summer cold. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
So we've seen some settlements going that way. So, if you start to look at the long game, which is to your point, is that you need this money to do the kind of things that Leonsis is wanting to do, which is see consolidation of media, consolidations of the sports teams. He needs that kind of support to enact that strategy. And you can kind of see the chess pieces pretty clearly.
Yeah, you have to have money. Am I the only one who's surprised that he didn't try to buy the Washington football team? I mean, you're talking about a guy who's like taking over Washington sports here.
I think his thing was to be everything else. I think he probably had like a bit of an A/B decision about, when that, and said, I'm just going to own everything else. And
maybe because it's a lot of money, and you can't borrow every dime. You do have to have people who have actual cash to do these things. There's guarantees. There's equity you have to put up. You cannot just buy everything on a credit card. So he does need money, and this is, by the way, is Josh Harris's problem. That's why it hasn't been approved yet, and why he has so many partners. And we're going to get to him later, but I mean, he does not have all these billions of dollars laying around. That's why he's got all these people. And so, yeah, I think the tie-in here to Leonsis is he found some deep pockets, and he's okay with it being a bunch of Middle Eastern oil guys. And Qatar is as much of an ally to the West as anybody in the Middle East can be, is Qatar. So they don't have, and in terms of Middle Eastern philosophies and stuff and Islamic, religion things, it's not nearly as restrictive as that of Saudi Arabia, and they don't have the human rights questions that Saudi Arabia does. Because for those who don't understand this, Saudi Arabia is a whole different sect of the Muslim religion. It's a different, it's kind of, Catholicism versus Baptist versus Episcopalian. There's differences, and the Saudi one is very, very, very restrictive. And that's not what Qatar is. So he's right to get in bed with them and not the Saudis for sure. But it's clearly him. He needs some cash. He brought in some partners. Wouldn't surprise me. I would be shocked if he didn't buy the Nationals, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, no, I think by all accounts he's a front runner at worst right now. And you sort of, you see it really is fascinating to look at Leonsis' strategy, because he also has a ton of egg on his face this week, because we won't get too deep into the sort of like sports moves of it all, but he is finally admitted that the Washington Wizards need to be broken down to the foundation, and then you might need to scrape off a level of foundation and pour some new concrete as well. So, which he, just a year ago had given Bradley Beal a $250 million guaranteed contract with the no trade clause, the only one of its kind in the NBA, and had this whole, we're going to keep our own, and, we pay our players, and, if trying to take an Ovechkin model that's worked for him in hockey into basketball, but they're two radically different situations. Anyway, whatever to that, but he's finally admitted that. So, and the backdrop of this week was him also taking one of those core businesses in those holdings, and also realizing that if his big aims are going to grow, he can't be limping along and taking all the egg on his face by having a completely inept basketball team. And so he just fired everyone, hired new people, walked out of the room, and they are just destroying the team in a positive way. Break to remake type of situation. Similar to Josh Harris's The Process with Philadelphia 76ers to do a callback. But they're basically doing a process-like situation in Washington. So that's, again, if you've got this giant business strategy that's sports, media, political influence, foreign national money, et cetera, you can also see, even with his teams, what he's doing to make them leaner and be in it for a longer game. So it really is fascinating. And I think you have to acknowledge that it's the Snyder void that he's stepping into here. And there's potentially he was going to be looking like the worst owner and he still might, right? Because he has been so beaten up as the Wizards owner, and they've been so horrendous that with Snyder exiting stage left as early as July 20th now, which looks pretty much set, his face is the idiot owner in town. So it's just fascinating, all of his public moves. And, he loves transparency. So, we're kind of seeing them all play out. It really is a fascinating game board.
Yeah, well, I don't think Leonsis has been much of a train wreck as Snyder has, but I think
personally, no, but yeah.
Yeah, the team hasn't been any good, obviously forever, the Wizards. But Leonsis has avoided the, I'm fondling my secretary claims and stuff that dog Snyder.
100%.
Yeah. So he's not like that type. But no, I mean, it is kind of amazing how beaten down Washington sports fans are. The Washington, the Redskins, the Wizards have sucked. The Nationals, other than the 1 year in which they cheated to beat my Dodgers and, won the World Series. Although I have thoughts about the Dodgers anymore. It's for another show, but I'll save that one. But so yeah, it's it's a good point you make. It's possible he would have been the whipping boy. If Josh Harris rolls into town in a month and cleans house himself and establishes professionalism and cuts some of the media, because let's be honest, it's provided the media, including us and the Hogsty and this show, hours and hours and hours and pages of content, because Dan Snyder's been such a mess. And with that gone, the sports media have to pick on somebody because they need to drive ratings still. And so Leonsis might have been the next best target. So it's not a bad idea that he just totally cleaned house. And let me tell you, for those of you who didn't know, and I didn't know until Chris pointed this out to me, because I've kind of divorced myself in the NBA, they really cleaned house. I mean, my God. So let's go over this trade, shall we? First, it's a two-parter. One, Bradley Beal to the Phoenix Suns in exchange for Chris Paul, and all the draft picks, basically.
Second round draft picks. No first round draft picks.
Well, yeah, they were first round pick swaps, though.
Swaps, yeah.
which means the higher of the pick will go to the Wizards. That's what this swap means. 24, 26, 28, and 2030. Second round picks 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, and 2030. For those of you counting, that's 6. Okay? That's a lot. And then let's see, Jordan Godwin, Isaiah Todd, also in this. And then so the second part of this is that then the Wizards immediately turn on and flip Chris Paul to the Golden State Warriors for Jordan Poole. And because I didn't remember this, tell everybody who Jordan Poole is, Chris.
So Jordan Poole is a good young player. He's, I think, just played in the first year of either 4 or 5 year, not max, but very healthy contract with Golden State. He was a big part of their championship run 2 years ago. But early in the season or even preseason, I can't remember, but he got punched in the face by Draymond Green. He's a younger player, was not really that popular with the older veterans on that team and Steve Kerr. So I guess this year was kind of rough. I guess when you get cold cocked in the face by a team leader, it's not going to be a great season. Is probably a solid rule. And so then by the time the playoffs hit, he kind of was publicly complaining and whining and kind of flamed out in the playoffs. So he sort of had a big stage embarrassment. So he was kind of damaged goods, but still a young player. I don't think he's older than like 22, 23. Shown lots of promise. Even last year, post-punch, he was a 20-point average guy with Golden State who has tons of guys who can score. So, you got to kind of get yours. And now he goes to the Wizards with a ton of upside and pretty much nobody to compete for shot selection with.
Yeah, nobody. And by the way, Chris didn't mention the name before, but Leonsis, when he fired everybody, brought in a new president of basketball operations, a guy named Michael Winger. But what we're reading here is what I'm reading is ESPN article by Tim Bontemps. Sources: Wizards to send Chris Paul to Warriors for Jordan Poole, dated the 22nd of June. So this, children, is how you do it. Okay, if you want to rebrand, start over, rebrand an organization, and set a new tone, this is what to do. You burn down absolutely everything. There's so many sports fans kind of don't want that and hold on and hold on and hold on. And, Washington football fans do this. Oh, the offensive line is, it's not that bad. And, the running backs are okay. And, that's not what to do. But Leonsis, to his everlasting credit, took a stick of dynamite under the team and lighted it and lit it and blew it up. And so now what do they have is they've got draft picks up the wazoo till 2030. They've got higher first round. They've got the higher of the first round picks through 2030. They've got a quality young player who needs a fresh start. And I can promise you they're not done with this. They are not done with this.
No, not at all. And they also traded Porzingis in a 3-player deal. We don't go into the details, but they also got rid of that big contract. And I think with Kyle Kuzma, he opted out, but they could still do a sign and trade there. So their options there are fairly limited, but they still have some way forward. But yeah, they said they gave this winger, and then Winger brought in a proper GM under him. So it's almost like it's almost like you have a whole division under Winger that includes scouts, general managers, day-to-day operations guys, and that brain trust has put this plan together. And that I think Winger came on about 4 or 5 weeks ago. Their new GM like 2 weeks ago. So not only that, but they've just broken. I mean, that's a blowtorch.
Yeah, that's my point, and this is the way to do it. Because the Wizards have been a mess. I think in part because of Ted Leonsis, for a long time. And he's done the right thing here and stepped aside, hired a professional who assembled a real team, who had a plan and are in the process of executing it. This is how to rebuild a franchise. And I think this is what Josh Harris did in Philadelphia. And I think probably Washington fans can expect something like this along these lines to happen once he takes over for the late Daniel Snyder. I think you're going to see something like this. And again, I mean, I think especially in sports, but in all things, sometimes you just have to throw something away and start over. So good for Leonsis, and I do think this seems to be part of. I think you make a good point. It's kind of a part of a larger strategy, where it's like, the king whipping boy is about to be run out of town. So who's next? And in what I said before, which is the media needs stories. They need drama. They want controversy. You see this in politics and all kinds of stuff. The media. Uh, they will find controversy even if there isn't any controversy, just to sell ads and find ratings. And Leonsis was clearly the next one up on the whipping post. And so what has he done? Blown up the Wizards. Talking about buying the Nationals. The Mystics. I don't think anybody cares about, but it's another asset.
Well, he's just clearly, yeah. And also, he just, he was taking a ton of bad press. Mostly, like I said, we're not talking about not any of the mishigash that we've dealt with in center. I'm talking about, like, the Wizards have been historically bad for a long time, and he has made, that Bradley Beal contract that he was the champion for was just maybe one of the worst sports contracts
Ever.
in the modern era, and definitely in the NBA. I mean, think of we talked about being a player-run league. You start to see that changing a little bit, actually. But whatever, that's the reputation at best. And he was the only no trade clause in the league. That's for Bradley Beal, who now is the third best player on his team now.
Suns, yeah.
So no disrespect to Bradley Beal, but like that deal was insane, and that was Ted's deal, right? He just like the team was historically bad, inept owner from a running the team standpoint. He was definitely next in line, and the Lerners are 2 steps out the door anyway. He was the only game in town. So it was almost like, well, let me just throw all my stories onto this week and just sort of like confuse with the volume a little bit and buy me some time, and then come out on the other side as the big mogul. It's going to be him and Josh Harris in 2 or 3 years. They'll own the market fully.
Well, to a certain extent, it's kind of like distracting everybody with the story of an imploding sub to avoid other larger political stories. How about that?
We can't stop at the sub while Russia's sliding into civil war.
Yeah, and then there's bribery and, a son sitting next to a father threatening Chinese oligarchs and other things, too. But one thing you said that I did not know about, Chris, so I don't know if you have it right in front of you. You said there was some moves towards a settlement between and the Nationals and the Orioles. I had not seen this.
So I have it on. Yeah.
We're doing it live here, kids. Give us a moment. I will vamp until he finds it.
Yeah, so I did this earlier. So if you just search,
he's searching. So the point is that when the Nationals moved from Montreal to Washington, for those of you who need to be caught up, Washington is a part of the Orioles territory, and so as a result of that, the Peter D'Angelo's kind of held up Major League Baseball and the Nationals for money, basically, and so the Orioles, through their ownership group and through their media group and everything, take a large percentage of the Nationals' profit, which really hurts the team because they don't have the money incoming to do payroll and whatnot. And so the result of that is you see people like Bryce Harper leave, and the others, who was the other pitcher who's gone too. And so,
Scherzer.
Yeah, thank you, Max Scherzer. And so that is what the Nationals have been facing forever, and there's been lawsuits going back and forth about who owes what money, and the Nationals say Angelos is taking too much, not paying him, and Angelos is saying the same thing about the Nationals. And so apparently, a story I have not seen at all, so I will react to it if Chris has found it, is that there is some form of settlement. So Chris, please let us all know.
So this happened earlier last week, around Tuesday. I'm seeing Athletic article: Orioles agree to settle part of mass and pay dispute with Nationals, and it was by Brittany Girali, I think. I'm close. Anyway, So what this did was the Orioles have agreed to settle part of their dispute over payments owed to Washington regarding the team's TV rights deals. Everything that Steve just said. Basically, Baltimore paid it, and Baltimore had lost both within baseball. They did not have support by the commissioner, Rob Manfred, and they had lost a couple of smaller court lead-ups, which we had discussed when they happened. So they were not on a winning streak here, Baltimore, on this developing case. So what was agreed was that the rights fee payment, which equals $100 million that covers the year 2012 to 2016, has now been settled and paid out. So Baltimore is now paid or is paying or owes whatever $100 million for 12 to 2016 rights fees. That means that 2017 onward is still in dispute, and it does nothing to settle the relationship. So the core relationship problem is still in dispute. What it does is it takes a chunk of those times and has been awarded, yes, Baltimore, you owe those rights fees, which equal $100 million for those years. And so one thing closes, but two key points still roll on. What they owe, which looks like they're going to owe, based on this, but from 2017 onward, and ultimately what extracts this relationship.
Yeah, no, so that's good. That's good for everybody. And just, if people don't know this, most lawsuits like this settle. You don't want to go to trial for this much money at stake. But we mentioned this before when we did this story a while ago, which is that, as Chris said, this only covers 2012 to 2016. The other part of it, the parties are still arguing over, and it's a whole separate issue and a whole separate matter. But now that we've gotten to this point, you have to think that they are probably talking now about settling the rest of it as well. I would assume. And also, if you think about it, it's kind of a larger picture here. If Ted Leonsis is going to buy the Nationals, he's not going to want to do it with this hanging out there, outstanding. So you're going to want to get, anytime you sell a major asset, you don't want major controversies to drag over into the new ownership. And so a lot of times this stuff gets settled quickly. So this may be a harbinger of things to come, which is get the dispute settled so the team can be sold.
I 100% agree. These are large chunks of money too, so it's also just like the value, playing in towards the value, which is what the learners have said without, the last basically year. With this as such an open issue, both in terms of how much we're worth, et cetera, it was hard to move forward. The other piece I think is super interesting for Leonsis, and here I'll just kind of to cap this off. The last paragraph of the article does state this very clearly. No agreement has been reached for 2017 to 2021, the sources said, and the overall deal that sees the Orioles control the television rights of the Nationals is still intact. So that is the core issue. That's still unsettled, and then there's still some cleanup on what fees. But if you're Ted Leonsis, with all of your moves, which you're centering monumental sports, it wants to be the sort of regional. I hate team-owned sports media outlets, but that's what he wants to do. He wants to own 3 teams, and he wants to own the broadcast rights for those 3+ teams. So he doesn't want to buy the Nationals when their TV rights are owned by another entity, whatever that entity is, Orioles or some holding company, because his whole plan is vertical integration of the media and the sports team. So it does him no good to buy a disputed media rights battle for the Nationals. To buy the Nationals and to pay premium for the Nationals, which right now it's below premium. He needs that TV rights thing. He needs a path to owning that too, or else it doesn't make sense for his overall strategy. And the overall strategy is monumental sports and entertainment.
Yeah, it doesn't do it. It's pointless for him to own the Nationals if it can't be on monumental sports. There's no point to that. And so, yeah, what's the next step? An out. So you negotiate an out of the contract. What does that look like? What it's going to look like is you pay Peter Angelos a chunk of money, and then you give him a cut of the profits of the Nationals part of the monumental sports income for some number of years. The details of it, who knows? But that is what the settlement, I can almost guarantee you, that is what the settlement would be. Here's a big chunk of money, and we're going to pay you some amount, X percentage for the next 10 years or some number of years like that. That is what it will be. And so the first step number 1 is to settle the active lawsuit, 2012, 2016. Step number 2 is to settle the dispute, which I don't think is a lawsuit yet. I think it's not. the 2017 and forward dispute, and then after that, it's how do we get out of it. So that's part 3, and then part 4 would be Ted Leonsis buys the team.
Right. I think if they settle if the TV issue, we'll just call it, is settled, I think you see a very aggressive Ted Leonsis at that point.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So if we're tracking towards 2 new titans of DC sports and entertainment, right? So Leonsis has obviously been around for a while, but from buying the Capitals, and then you can see this is decades now. You can see the moves. So we see that consolidation. We just talked about it for 35 minutes. Then you obviously have Josh Harris. Now, what this is interesting is we also got a couple, I think, of one very substantial piece of news on the sale and Josh Harris walking into his new role. And that is that the NFL has officially called the date of July 20th. So that's the earlier of the 2 dates that were floated. So basically, like, hey, you have a chance to get off your yacht and into a boardroom in New York or California or something. Because they like to do this with butts and seats. It's not a Zoom situation or, conference call. So that's now going to be July 20th. That's official from the NFL. So that means we should get a full transfer of the keys. That is your parade moment, right? When that deal gets accepted, the finance committee has given it a thumbs up. So it has been moved past committee in terms of that, and now set for July 20th. So let's say by September 1st, we'll even give some weeks of cleanup here. By September 1st, you've got your 2 titans pretty firmly established, and Josh Harris is also making moves, obviously with the Rails connection. So there's a lot of local connections already, and now has done. I don't know what exactly to read from this, but part of that Josh Harris sports empire now includes a little bit of Joe Gibbs Racing, which makes sense from a portfolio perspective of what Josh Harris has tried to do. But also, is this a kiss the ring? Is this a consolidation of sort of cultural power as the new owner? And then you really have a Leonsis v. Josh Harris thing that's super fascinating, considering that they'll compete for kind of attention and prestige in the DC area, and they'll compete literally on the ice and on the court in 2 markets. It's pretty fascinating.
The Josh Harris buying into Joe Gibbs is what interests me most, I think, right now. I can't imagine that Harris didn't approach Joe Gibbs to ask him to be a part of his ownership group. I would assume that probably happened. And Gibbs is not a part of it. By the way, there's a story on this. There's a bunch of them, but what I'm reading, which is also what we cited on the Hogsty, this CBS Sports, Josh Harris, future Washington Commanders owner, purchased minority stake in Joe Gibbs Racing by Steven Tarantino from the 21st of June. I think what's going on here is I think Harris just wants a connection to the number 1 name in Washington sports history. If you can't get him to be a part of your ownership group, let's have another business relationship with him so the fans of DC see this. The fans of Washington see this and see that he knows and he's in good with Joe Gibbs. There's no other better way to build credibility than to get Joe Gibbs involved. Joe Gibbs is the only one who has survived, that I can think of, who survived the scourge of Dan Snyder with his reputation intact. Everybody else that I can think of was destroyed by working for Dan Snyder. Joe Gibbs was not. He didn't recreate the Super Bowl years, but he had a successful run, and he wasn't ruined by it. And his reputation wasn't ruined, and his strength of character was not challenged. And here you have Harris marrying himself to Gibbs. And by the way, I mean, Chris and I are not NASCAR fans particularly. I mean, really. But Joe Gibbs Racing is one of the premier names in NASCAR, okay? It's a huge name. I couldn't name them all, but it's one of the very major names. And there's lots of investments Harris could have made, but this was done with a purpose, and I think the purpose is to show the Washington fans that he is involved with their hero.
Oh, I think completely, and I agree that he was probably. I think he was probably approached a number of ways at a number of times. Which definitely think, come be a small minority owner here. And I think Gibbs demurred. I think he demurred probably because he still had some relationship with Snyder, and to keep that reputation intact, you can't be. You see a lot of people that were Snyder sycophants over the last 20 years burying the knife in his back now, just because it's like easy. And Gibbs is not the type to do that on a number of levels. So I think he probably demurred there. Plus, also like, why hassle? And he said, hey, but you can come in on Gibbs Racing because ultimately nobody cares these distinctions, And the reality is, you say, hey, here is the Harris sports empire, and and the big brands, right? The sort of like sub logos, you'll see Commanders, Gibbs Racing, like 76ers,
There's no
Devils.
better advertising than that.
Right, so it'll still sit there. These are the things that Harris owns and invests in from a sports, and you'll still see, Washington football team and Gibbs Racing will still be linked. No one cares about what direction or what part is. All that matters is that Gibbs Racing is part of the same sports media, business conglomerate that owns Washington.
And Gibbs is a legitimate and classy guy. I think a lot of times when you see athletes, actors, musicians, celebrities, politicians who are very charismatic and they come across as friendly and stuff in the media and in public, they're really not that. It's kind of like sometimes you hear the old saying, you don't want to ever meet your heroes. I've never told this on the air, but before I tried to get Joe Gibbs on the Hogsty a few years ago, and I contacted his office and his team through Joe Gibbs Racing. And they were nothing but, I didn't think it would work. It was kind of Hail Mary. I never thought that there was a strong chance that Gibbs would actually do it, but it was worth a shot, right? And they didn't have to answer me. They didn't have to be nice. They didn't have to say anything. And they were nothing but class. They got back to me immediately. The person I contacted said, this is not my area. Contact someone else. Here's the contact. I'll have them contact you. All that happened. And I got the sense that level of professionalism in class probably pervades from its leader. There are other people I contacted who I won't disclose, who were the opposite of that. People with teams and people who I contacted to try to get on the Hogsty who were rude, didn't have to be like that. Joe Gibbs' whole team was nothing but class. And I can personally attest to that because that was my personal experience. And so I think it helps Josh Harris to have a guy like that involved who is legitimate and who may be the only thing left from Washington football that the fans still adore.
Right. And, do you see a Commanders or whatever Washington helmet on the NASCAR cars, right? Like, there's all kinds of, I think it's a smart move on many levels. And I think it's a strong way for Gibbs to signal his support, right? Like, so he wasn't seen as like he didn't do a kiss and tell after he left the Snyder era. He still seemed open, he was occasionally, in the box or whatever like that. He kind of was publicly loyal or at least didn't, kick him when he was down. Which I don't think anyone would have even faulted him for. But this way does.
That's not who he is.
Yeah, no. But now this was I approve of the new owner.
It's kind of is. It's sort of a thumbs up, because he's not going to Joe Gibbs Racing does not need the investment. Okay. I mean, they'll take the money probably, but they don't need this. They're highly, highly successful. It's not a distressed asset. It's one of the elite organizations in NASCAR racing, which itself is doing very well. And so he doesn't need this. And so, I do think like this business marriage here is sort of an implicit, tacit approval of Josh Harris as the new Washington owner from the only person on the planet that the fans really actually care about.
Well, it should be fascinating. So I think the narrative for years to come, I predict, Josh Harris isn't as public, even as Leonsis. He's actually kind of a little bit more of a reserved, not attention hog type. But we're going to see, I can't wait to see like the first Wizards 76ers home game, with Josh Harris over in the visitors box and stuff. And there's
Who's he going to root for now?
It'll be
Who's he going
very
to root for in
interesting.
that game?
Yeah, well, I mean the team he owns, right?
Yeah, I guess.
And
Yeah.
this is, to kind of tie it back, this is a little similar to like what we're seeing with these foreign national money. Like it is also sort of weird, and the Cronkies are kind of like this as well, like these that you own sports teams in different markets, right? Like it's just, like this idea that there's like some kind of like parochial loyalty here, whether you're talking about city, state, country, or international, is kind of washing away.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and listen, and Josh Harris isn't that far away, mind you. I mean, he's in Philadelphia, and my guess is that if the Eagles had been available to be purchased prior to um, Washington, he probably would have gone for the Eagles. He's only moving a couple of hours down the street, kids. you know,
And and I think he is originally from. I think he went to high school in the DC area.
yeah, there's some kind of connection. There is some kind of
So
connection.
so all right. So our Titan. We're seeing the complete remaking of the Titans board in DC. And we'll quickly jump to the other coast and check in on the continued fire sale of Oakland sports franchises to Las Vegas. I mean, is it the Oakland to Vegas corridor? Is that what we call it? I don't know.
How much are the people of Oakland going to hate the city of Las Vegas? For this. So what we're talking about here is that the Oakland A's are going to become the Las Vegas A's, the Las Vegas baseball team, I guess. I would assume they're going to keep the name Athletics. I had not paid too much attention to this story before this week because it's just kind of a bit out of my wheelhouse. It's the AL, it's the West Coast. But the Nevada government, the Nevada governor, Joe Lombardo, just this past Thursday, signed a bill that allocated $380 million in taxpayer funds towards a new stadium for the A's in Las Vegas. And so the A's are moving, and this is ESPN. Nevada governor signs bill to fund Las Vegas Stadium for athletics. Jeff Passan on the 15th of June. So it's 9 days ago for us recording this. And the A's said we are beginning the relocation process. There's interestingly, there's a $1 billion relocation fee that's normally attached to these things that MLB will charge teams when they move. MLB has said, in light of the fact that they conned the government of Nevada out of free taxpayer money, looks like they're uh, waiving the $1 billion relocation fee. So yet again, this is another example of the city of Las Vegas, who not a decade ago was a pariah of professional sports because of their ties to gambling, has been embraced wholeheartedly by one of the four major American professional sports leagues. The Golden Knights are there. The Oakland Raiders moved to Las Vegas, and now the A's. It's just very telling how far Las Vegas has come and how much gambling is now an integral part of sports. I think that is amazing how far we've come.
Yeah, and the Golden Knights just won the Stanley Cup. So, and the Golden Knights were they really were the first tent poles for Vegas into this move. And that's gone very well for them. They were popular very quickly. They were embraced very quickly, and now they've been in the Stanley Cup twice, and now have won it once. I think I think their franchise is only 6 or 7 years old, something like that. I
Something
think
like
I
that,
might.
yeah.
So top of the food chain success quickly, showed the viability, was first into the market, and the speed. If you just sort of if you start from the Golden Knights when when the puck dropped on the game one at their first home game, whenever that October of whatever 5 to 6 years ago that is, to right now is pretty remarkable. That's a lot of speed.
How do you feel about $380 million in taxpayer money going to build a stadium for the Oakland A's?
I don't look, I mean, that's that bigger issue around, how much, the people, government should be invested in here. I could probably, in a place like that, that's so tourism driven, where they're used to funding those kind of things to some degree because it is the number one industry for that region and maybe the state overall. I don't have their stats right in front of me.
Probably.
Because Reno as well. So, you can understand the public investment there better than I might, like some like, Midwestern city or whatever that does, or that moves the needle very little. But I mean, it is problematic that you're able to do that. Las Vegas is an interesting place, though. I mean, it had a housing boom and then a housing bust, and it's probably growing fast again. So there's lots of things that play into that. But I don't think we should be. I'm pretty generally anti-financing billionaires.
Yeah, me too. And it's strange that yet another Chris is a wild lefty, and I'm a wild righty, and politically. And this is another thing where we come together on. I have a very big problem with governments at any level putting tons of money into building stadiums for billionaires, multi-billionaires. If you're going to spend federal, or taxpayer money on construction projects, let's do it to help people. Affordable housing, maybe community centers, public facilities. The stadium is only going to benefit um, the owner of the team in this particular case. And by the way, I mean, there's a lot of billionaires per capita that are running Las Vegas because of the gambling industry. Can't one of them finance this for them? Can't you jump into bed with one of them? Maybe. I have kind of almost a bigger problem with it in Las Vegas than I do in other places. But I do not like doing this because this is all government money is taxpayer money. Sometimes they'll sell bonds, which is slightly less offensive, but sometimes it's just general fund money. Like a bond is basically you sell a bond and it's going to be stadium bond. People invest in the bond, and then after a certain number of years, they get their investment back plus interest. That's kind of what a bond is. And so again, that's slightly less offensive because it's not mandatory, uh, you know, mandatory financing, but taxpayer money is, and I really, really don't like it.
So yeah, these are there's actually a good amount of common ground on those kind of things when you extrapolate past the noise and look at sort of core issues, and I definitely basically agree. Vegas is an interesting place because you can make the case that a giant tourism capital built in the middle of the desert by mostly mobsters had a pretty fluid two-way street between civic dollars and criminal dollars to begin with. So like the entire thing we call Las Vegas was basically porous walls between where money comes from and flows in general. So
It's more
it's
like a
not.
broken chain link fence.
Yeah, so it makes a lot of sort of sense if you know how Las Vegas was built and continues to be built. I won't go too far into it, and it's a wild story in many many ways. But I don't know, like let's call it a decade ago, I was able to go on a junket to visit the Zappos headquarters and their entrepreneur Tony Hsieh, who had built his empire in Las Vegas after he'd already become successful. I think after he sold/licensed Zappos, the shoe company, to Amazon, but still retained ownership, whatever. But he built a whole empire, basically a company town in what they call downtown Las Vegas. The Zappos studios or Zappos headquarters was literally in the old Las Vegas Municipal Building. Their in-office gym was the old municipal jail. So it was the strangest 2 days. I could go on for hours. I will not. But when we first got there in our junket, day one was in Zappos headquarters, the old municipal building. And they take us in and you watch like a origin of Zappos video. And it had Tony Hsieh, who is now since dead, of his own hand. Very strange story and saga. And then his number two, and they kind of do this video. And then right at the end, this like older guy pops into the video and does like a ta-da move. And then all three of them take a beat and they say, oh, by the way, that's our mayor. So the mayor totally genuflects to the Tony Hsieh and his number two, his COO, in the promo video for Zappos, just because we needed more visual evidence that the city of Las Vegas, which turns out to be completely true because some of this imploded later, and not too far after when I was there, that the city of Las Vegas had just rolled over and given this guy everything he wanted, to the point where they made him look like a fool in the literal Welcome to Zappos introduction video. So, there's a kind of an example of the kind of relationships between big money and politicians in the world of Las Vegas.
Yeah, and that's true throughout the country in various levels or another. One small bit of good that's come out of this is that one promise that the government of Nevada extracted out of the ownership of the A's was apparently a guarantee to spend $2 million annually on the community without defining what that means. And so, they give 380, they're going to have 2 million per year coming back. And so that's one small benefit, I guess. It's certainly not worthwhile, but that's one thing. So the last thing about this, though, I'm curious how is this another inroads into gambling? I mean, are we now going to see the A's get in bed with DraftKings or anything like that? Is this another inroad of gambling into professional sports? I'm not sure it is, but I find it hard to just totally ignore the connection.
I sort of think that these Las Vegas teams are going to be a little bit more buttoned up than, like, here's what I'd say. I don't think that they will be any more integrated into that than any other team in their respective leagues, which is now going to be, football, basketball, and hockey, by the time, baseball,
right. Football,
basketball, yes.
No, it's not basketball.
Not basketball. Everyone but basketball, yeah.
Yeah.
I think the Golden State Warriors will stay in Northern California. But everybody else is there, and I think they'll be just as much in bed with the league's in bedness with the DraftKings of the world. So they'll be mandated to carry whatever, right? Because that's all centrally negotiated. I actually think for what they can control or what they're part of, they'll actually try to be fairly chaste about it because of the perception, because of and because I think these sports teams are such, in a place like Las Vegas, are such economic drivers probably, that it almost, why you don't need to upset the apple cart too much by really being like fully integrated with gambling, like a Ted Leonsis is done in Washington, where you don't have that kind of residue. So I actually think they won't be leaders. Those individual teams will not be leaders in the kind of like gambling team bed relationships.
Well, they really can't be, because then it really does smack of just corruption, and it does threaten the integrity of the game itself. So you can't have that. You can't have the Las Vegas teams roll in and just jump right into bed with the win in Caesar's Palace. That's just doesn't set a good tone. They're already, teetering on the edge as it is. And so, yeah, I tend to agree with you, and I think that you probably won't see more of a marriage because they're going to want to intentionally keep it at arm's length, I think.
If you look at Atlantic City versus Vegas, which were, for long swaths of our lives on Earth, and through like the sort of modern era of America, were the only two places you could legally gamble, right? This is even pre-reservation casinos, all that, right? It was like you either go to Atlantic City or you went to Las Vegas, and Vegas won. Sort of like, if you considered that kind of an A versus B battle, mostly because they embraced a more total view of vacation land, right? They did, we're for families, the spectacle. And so sports teams are part of that. Like Atlantic City, you can gamble, and kind of gambling actually destroyed its previous tourism, was just as the beach. So, Jersey Shore type stuff, which that Atlantic City kind of made that one of the grosser places to go for that experience. So, it's a real contrast, but the reason Vegas was able to swamp Atlantic City was because they took a more holistic view of turning themselves into a tourism capital. So I think they also just have done a better job. I mean, I think it's insane that a family would want to go there to a large degree. And I did that kind of haphazardly a couple of years ago. But that is in fact what they have built. I mean, it's an R-rated Disneyland with lots of G and PG activities.
Yeah, well, I think there's also a lot more opportunity to expand in Las Vegas simply because of the geography of it than
space.
Space, and Atlantic City's kind of been there, but yes, it's Atlantic City is kind of the B team, probably for this in the United States, whereas you're not going to fly from California to Atlantic City, but you are going to fly from California to Las Vegas, So, yeah, it's interesting. We'll see, and again, I have to think, how much of the people of Oakland now hate Las Vegas? I mean, really, probably quite a bit. It's only a matter of time, kids, before the Warriors bail out of California.
Yeah, that would be
Can you
rough,
imagine if that happens?
Yeah, that
They're not
would
going
be,
to
I
anytime
don't
soon
think
because
so.
they're making a fortune and their team's worth
Yeah.
a huge amount of money and everything. And I
And
want to
they
say
claim
they
San
haven't.
Francisco. I mean, it's a more Northern California region than it is, Oakland specific.
Yeah, and I don't think they're having stadium issues with the Warriors, if I recall.
No.
Because see, the backdrop to the Oakland A's problem is that the Oakland Coliseum is a dump. It's like a FedEx level dump or worse. And they have been trying to get it done. Now, interestingly enough, and we're out of time here, but this column here does quote the ESPN story does quote Oakland as saying we were ready and this is an interesting PR move here. The city of Oakland does say we were ready and willing to do a stadium, but the A's wanted this whole mixed-use commercial development around it worth $12 billion, and that we couldn't do. But if they had just wanted us to build a stadium like they're now doing in Las Vegas, we wanted to do that. The A's, for their part, said they never made us an offer. Now, it's probably a shade of gray in what the A's are kind of lying because it sounds like they might not have been presented with a formal offer, but there clearly were discussions. And so I think you can, if you want to pick a side on that, I think the city of Oakland's probably being more truthful. And at the end of the day, probably Oakland just got a better deal and wanted to move on.
Yeah, and it's not. Yes, it's a tough market. You really are talking about it is sort of a Twin Cities vibe. So it's not the easiest. It's obvious these Oakland teams. Whether you got to remember that the Raiders, ping ponged from LA to back to Oakland. So that, it's always been a bit of a fluid market there.
Oakland's not a great sports market. It's not a vibrant city. There's a lot of problems, a lot of crime, and not a lot of money. It's kind of the Detroit of California a little bit. And so certainly the Las Vegas market would be better just from a marketing standpoint, I think. Local marketing standpoint.
Definitely. All right, Steve. We're at the end. I'm sure that I don't know, what position are you doing? Are you on the long snappers now?
Well, no, we're not down to long snap. We just did quarterbacks this week and position group breakdowns for the Hog side. And to be perfectly honest, I cannot remember what's next. And I need to figure that out today because we need to do it. We need to actually get it done. So that's on my list of things to do this weekend. But we still got the Hog side podcast and all of our regular written content. We're gearing up for training camp at this point. So get ready for all of that.
Right, and we get all the official new ownership things. Will he? Won't he? On a bunch of things. Well,
absolutely.
I'm excited to flip. I'm excited to flip to that. It's at least it's more interesting.
Oh yeah, it's nobody wants to. The train wreck is fun for a minute, and then you're tired of the train wreck.
Yeah. All right, Steve. So we will talk in 2 weeks.